Since the dawn of civilization, man has battled not only against predators and harsh weather, but against something far more subtle and devastating: the complete annihilation of his own essence. But what if I told you that the greatest tyrant you face doesn't live in a distant palace, but stares back at you in the mirror every morning? You wake up, put on your social mask, perform your perfectly calculated role, and die a little more each day. This is the great tragedy of modern man. He has become such a convincing actor that he has forgotten who he really is beneath the persona. Carl Gustav Jung, the giant of analytical psychology, dedicated his life to a disturbing truth. Most human beings live a completely false existence. They construct elaborate social masks, what Jung called the persona, and gradually become slaves to their own creations. You know this prison. It's the constant fear of judgment, the exhaustion of maintaining a perfect image, the emptiness you feel when you're alone. Jung understood that this persona is not just a social tool. It's a prison that prevents man from finding his true nature, his authentic potential. In the next minutes, we won't just philosophize about authenticity. We'll dive into the abysses of the human psyche with Jung as our guide, and extract a practical manual for the most dangerous of journeys: the conscious destruction of the persona you created to be accepted. Prepare yourself, because the knowledge you're about to receive will not only transform your life, it might destroy it before rebuilding it. The law of conscious identification. First Jungian law. You cannot destroy what you cannot identify. The persona is like a second skin, so familiar it has become invisible. Jung discovered that the persona emerges as a social survival mechanism. From childhood, you learned that certain parts of yourself were unacceptable, while others were rewarded. Gradually, you buried the unacceptable and amplified the approved. The persona was born from this fragmentation. But here's the cruel paradox. The mask you created to be loved has become the very barrier that prevents genuine love. People relate to your persona, never to you. Consider the tragedy of Oscar Wilde, a literary genius who built a persona of an irreverent, witty, socially acceptable dandy. Wilde became a prisoner of his own creation, forced to always be brilliant, always performative. When his authentic nature emerged through his love for Lord Alfred Douglas, Victorian society destroyed him. Wilde spent his final years in Paris, stripped of his public persona, finally confronting who he really was. He wrote, "I can resist everything except temptation." But the most dangerous temptation wasn't pleasure, it was authenticity. On social media, you live an amplified version of this tragedy. Your digital persona has become more real than your physical identity. You carefully choose every post, every photo, every comment to maintain the image you've constructed. The algorithm rewards your performance, but your soul withers. Begin the persona audit exercise. For 1 week, observe yourself in different social environments. Note, how do you act at work versus with close friends? What parts of your personality do you hide? Which aspects do you exaggerate? This awareness is the first step toward liberation, the law of internal resistance. Second law. Your persona will fight for survival with the ferocity of a cornered animal. It is a psychological parasite that feeds on your social approval. Jung understood that the persona develops a will of its own. It's not just a passive mask. It's an active psychological complex that influences your thoughts, desires, and fears. When you threaten to destroy it, it responds with paralyzing anxiety, social terror, and internal voices of self-preservation. This resistance is not weakness. It's the most sophisticated defense mechanism of the psyche. Your persona knows your weak points and will use every one against you. Observe the transformation of Saul into Paul of Tarsus. Saul had built a relentless persona as a persecutor of Christians, respected, feared, with elevated social status. When he had his vision on the road to Damascus, it wasn't just a religious conversion. It was the violent death of an identity. The resistance was brutal. Paul spent 3 years in the Arabian desert battling against the wreckage of his former persona. He wrote, "I die daily." It wasn't a metaphor. It was the literal account of a man systematically destroying who he used to be. When you begin to question your professional, familial, or social persona, you'll experience waves of terror. Your brain will interpret this as a threat of social death. You'll hear internal voices. What if no one likes who I really am? What if I lose my job? What if I end up alone? Practice gradual exposure to authenticity. Choose a safe environment and experiment with showing an authentic aspect of yourself that you normally hide. Observe the internal resistance without judgment. Record the fears that arise. This is the cartography of your personal prison. The law of integrated shadow. Third law. What you most despise in yourself contains the key to your liberation. Jung called this the shadow, the repressed aspects of your personality. The persona exists in direct opposition to the shadow. If your persona is polite, your shadow is wild. If your persona is strong, your shadow is vulnerable. Jung discovered that conscious integration of the shadow not only destroys the persona, it releases massive psychological energy that was being wasted on repression. The shadow is not evil. It is unlived life, unexpressed potential, unmanifested authenticity. Analyze Dostoevsky's journey. His persona was that of a respectable man, Orthodox Christian, member of the Russian intelligentsia. But his shadow seethed with destructive impulses, religious doubts, and fascination with evil. Instead of repressing this shadow, Dostoevsky channeled it into his works. Raskolnikov, Ivan Karamazov, the underground man, all were manifestations of his integrated shadow. He became one of history's greatest writers, not despite his darkness, but because of it. Your repressed anger can become creative passion. Your hidden vulnerability can become deep human connection. Your laziness might be wisdom about natural rhythms. The energy you spend hiding aspects of yourself can be redirected toward creation and growth. Implement shadow dialogue. Identify a trait you most criticize in others. Question: where does this trait exist in you? Write a dialogue between your persona and the shadow aspect. Not to eliminate it, but to understand its message. The law of voluntary death. Fourth law. The persona must die symbolically so that the authentic self can be born. This is the most courageous death, the voluntary destruction of a false identity. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, requires symbolic death. It's not physical death, but the conscious dissolution of patterns, identities, and behaviors that no longer serve the soul. This death is simultaneous with a birth. You don't become empty. You become free to discover who you always were beneath the layers of social conditioning. Contemplate Hermann Hesse's transformation. At 40, he had an established persona: respected writer, bourgeois husband, family man. but his soul was dying. Hesse consciously destroyed his comfortable life, divorced, abandoned respectability, plunged into psychoanalysis. For years he lived as a social outcast, but from this death emerged Siddhartha, Steppenwolf, works that touched millions of souls. Hesse wrote, "Some of us think that holding on to things makes them more real, but holding on is just an illusion. Maybe you need to die as the professional you hate being, to be born as the creator you always were. Maybe you need to die as the obedient child, to be born as the autonomous adult. Each destroyed persona releases vital energy for a more authentic life. Perform the symbolic death ritual. Write a farewell letter to an aspect of your persona you're ready to abandon. Describe who you were, thank it for its services, and consciously declare that this version. So far, we've established the fundamental pillars of Jungian liberation. You've learned to identify your persona, recognize your internal resistance, dialogue with your shadow, and accept the necessity of symbolic death. These are the foundations, the preparation for the real war. But this is just the demolition. Now we enter the territory of conscious reconstruction. The next laws are not for the faint of heart. They teach how to resurrect after the death of the persona, how to build an authentic identity in a world that punishes authenticity, and how to use your new freedom without becoming a tyrant to yourself. The law of active individuation. Fifth law. The destruction of the persona is only the first act. The second is the conscious construction of an authentic identity, what Jung called individuation. Jung discovered that you're not born with a fixed identity. You develop it through conscious choices. Individuation is different from persona development because it doesn't seek external approval, but internal alignment. It's the process of becoming a unique individual, not a standardized copy. But here's the danger. Freedom from the persona can become a new prison if you don't know how to use this freedom consciously. Examine Leonardo da Vinci's journey. He consciously rejected the available personas of his time. He didn't become just an artist, just an inventor, just a scientist. Leonardo created an integrated identity that transcended social categories. His individuation was so radical that he was considered a dangerous outsider. The church viewed him with suspicion. Artists thought him arrogant. Scientists considered him an amateur. But Leonardo wasn't seeking approval. He was seeking authentic expression of his multifaceted nature. Your individuation might mean creating a career that doesn't exist, combining talents that society keeps separate. It might mean developing a lifestyle that doesn't fit into any pre-established category. It's the courage to be unclassifiable. Develop your individuation project. List your authentic talents, passions, and values, not those you think you should have. Create a life vision that integrates all these elements, even if it seems impossible or socially strange. Start with one small step toward that vision. The law of creative solitude. Sixth law. The persona dies in crowds, but the authentic self is born in solitude. Jung understood that solitude is not isolation. It's the laboratory of the soul. The persona is fundamentally social. It exists to impress others. When you're truly alone, without an audience, without judgment, your false identity has no reason to exist. Solitude forces you to confront who you really are when no one is watching. Jung spent years in voluntary solitude, dialoguing with his unconscious. He realized that society was preventing him from hearing his own voice. Consider Henry David Thoreau's transformation. He consciously removed himself from society, living 2 years at Walden Pond. It wasn't escapism. It was a scientific experiment with his own soul. In solitude, Thoreau discovered that most of his needs were artificial, created by social pressure. He wrote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." His solitude cured him of this desperation by revealing his authentic values. Your social media is the antithesis of creative solitude. Every moment of potential self-knowledge is interrupted by notifications, external validations, comparisons. Modern solitude requires military discipline against addictive connectivity. Institute sacred solitude hours. Daily, spend at least 1 hour completely alone, without devices, without distractions. Not to meditate or relax, but to encounter yourself. Record what emerges from this solitude. Thoughts, desires, fears that only appear when you're truly alone. The law of radical responsibility. 7th law. With the death of the persona come total responsibility for your resistance. You can no longer blame society, parents, or circumstances for who you are. Jung realized that the persona is, in part, an escape from responsibility. When you act through social roles, you can always say, "I was just doing my job." That's how things are done. Individuation removes these excuses. This radical responsibility is simultaneously liberating and terrifying. You become the author of your own story, but also the only one responsible for it. Analyze Jean-Paul Sartre's journey. He developed the philosophy of existentialism precisely from this Jungian insight. Sartre declared, "Man is condemned to be free. There's no predetermined essence, no persona you must be." This radical freedom terrified even Sartre. He wrote about nausea, the experience of realizing you're entirely responsible for giving meaning to your existence. But he also found in this responsibility the source of all human dignity. You can no longer say, "I'm just like this," or "it's my personality." Every reaction, every choice, every behavioral pattern becomes a conscious decision. This is the most frightening freedom, the freedom to completely reinvent yourself. Practice radical responsibility. For 1 week, before each action or reaction, pause and ask, "Am I choosing this consciously or reacting out of habit?" Take complete ownership of every choice, even the small ones. Observe how this changes your life experience. The law of dangerous authenticity. 8th law. True authenticity is dangerous to the social order. Jung knew that the authentic individual is a threat to systems based on conformity. Jung realized that society needs personas to function. When you become authentic, you become unpredictable, unclassifiable, uncontrollable. This generates anxiety in the social system, which will try to force you back into conformity. Authenticity isn't just being yourself. It's being brave enough to express your truth, even when it disturbs others. Contemplate Giordano Bruno's fate. He consciously rejected the persona of obedient cleric and expressed his truths about the infinite universe. The church burned him alive in 1600. Bruno could have hidden behind a safe academic persona, but chose dangerous authenticity. His last words were, "Perhaps you, who pronounce this sentence, feel more fear than I, who receive it." He died free. Your authenticity might cost friendships, career opportunities, family approval. The modern social system is more subtle than medieval bonfires, but equally hostile to radical individuality. You'll be labeled, marginalized, canceled. Develop authentic courage. Identify a truth of yours that you hide for fear of social consequences. Practice expressing it first in safe environments, then gradually in more challenging contexts. Accept that authenticity has a price, and decide if it's worth paying. We've traveled together the most dangerous path of human existence. You've learned to identify your persona, face your internal resistance, integrate your shadow, and accept the necessary symbolic death. Then, we explored active individuation, creative solitude, radical responsibility, and dangerous authenticity. These are not just psychological techniques. They are tools for the deepest revolution possible, the transformation of a programmed human being into a conscious individual. Jung showed us that this journey is simultaneously the most difficult and most necessary that a human being can undertake. But listen well to this warning. The knowledge you've acquired today is a double-edged sword. It can be used for genuine liberation or for a new form of tyranny, the tyranny of an inflated ego that considers itself superior to the unconscious. Jung warned us about this danger. Individuation is not about becoming special or superior. It's about becoming real. Use this knowledge to free yourself, not to judge others who still live through personas. Remember, you too were a prisoner for a long time. The true mark of individuation is not arrogant rejection of society, but the ability to participate in it consciously, maintaining your authenticity. Be the living example that it's possible to be real in a fake world. In the comments, share which of these Jungian laws most resonates with your personal journey. Which persona are you most ready to destroy? Your courage can inspire others to begin their own liberation journey. If this exploration of the human psyche's depths awakens something in you, subscribe to the channel. We'll continue unraveling the deepest secrets of human nature, always with Jung, Nietzsche, and other masters as our guides. The journey of self-knowledge never ends. Your like is the signal that this dangerous but necessary knowledge has value. It's the recognition that you're ready for the most radical transformation possible, the conscious destruction of who you never were, for the birth of who you always were. Remember, the persona you created to be accepted was only the first draft of your existence. Now you have the tools to write the definitive version. Use them wisely.